So, welcome. Good morning. Welcome to the Ripples of Change, the podcast where the inner self meets outer transformation. As change agents, our impact depends on how we show up. The self awareness we cultivate, the presence we bring to groups, the ways we influence others, all shape the change we hope to see. In this podcast, we talk with guests about what it means to use ourselves as instruments of change and how their work brings healing and wholeness to people, relationships, and organizations. I'm Abby Yano, your host. As an executive coach and organizational consultant, I've spent years honing my ability to lead with awareness and purpose. And I'm excited to explore these ideas with my guest, Anne Pratt. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abby. Great to be here.
Lovely. So, Anne, you grew up in South Africa in an anti-apartheid activist family. Your mother used her white privilege to teach in a Black medical education program, and you subsequently met Nelson Mandela and worked with him for some time. Can you explain how those things shaped your thinking about what excellent leadership looks like?
Abby, thank you for that question. And yeah, as a former executive search consultant who ran one of South Africa's top international executive search firms, I've worked in leadership for a long time. And I've worked alongside the Nelson Mandela Foundation, but also interviewed around 10,000 leaders across Africa and around the world. So I think I come with a number of different lenses. One is my own childhood and my own experience growing up in the environment in which you've described. And then, of course, helping Mandela's presidency with Mandela kind of leaders to help fulfill his dream for South Africa, a rainbow nation and a better life for all. I think personally, from my own childhood experience, what I learned as a child growing up in a bold family with strong matriarchs who taught in Black medical education and did pro bono work in rural mission hospitals in rural KwaZulu-Natal, is that I think as a child, I learned to separate people who had positions of power, which were people in the nationalist apartheid government of the time, and people on the ground who were exercising leadership. So I learned to understand that leadership wasn't necessarily about people in power. It's about we, the people, who exercise our power and exercise leadership. I think that's the first thing. The second thing I learned is that leadership is really about courage and conviction. I think it's about sacrifice and discipline. And I think there were millions of unsung heroes across South Africa, Africa, and the world who joined the global anti-apartheid movement to show up with boldness, with courage, and who often made significant sacrifices. I think the other thing I learned was that, the playing field, when we talk about leadership and we talk about excellent leadership, I think what often happens is we confuse morality and leadership. I think that the playing fields consists of good and bad actors. Good and bad actors can both exercise leadership, but whether they're exercising leadership with good intent or ill intent comes down to morality. And I think our moral conscience, what I also learned is that it's a longer fight. But when you exercise leadership with bold moral courage, when you do what's right, you ultimately, in the long term, win the good fight. And I think the last thing I would say, Abby, is that Ubuntu, which is our African cultural, philosophical value system of our interconnectedness as humanity, the invisible bond that binds our human spirit, is the secret sauce. And I think it's the secret sauce that really guided Mandela's leadership. And when people ask me what was the magic of Mandela, I think the magic and the secret sauce really is our African spirit of Ubuntu.
Mm, that's so lovely. I mean, the concept of Ubuntu to bring people together, that we are all in this fight together, that we are responsible for each other's well-being, right?
Yeah.
That it's a collective effort. So beautifully said.
Yeah, it is. And I think, what we learned in Africa is that I think there is a misguided perception and conception that you can achieve privilege, supremacy, and dominance and sustain it. Ubuntu teaches us that you cannot sustain dominance or
Right.
supremacy or privilege over a longer period. And I think history helps us because history teaches us that too.
Yes. Even if it's the long arc of justice as opposed to the short term.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Well, you've laid out a beautiful image of what I want to say moral leadership is, because we want to focus on that which is moral and the good actors, those who are working with courage and conviction. So you have your focus is on transforming the leadership crisis worldwide.
Yeah.
Can you describe that crisis and what is the work you're doing to address that crisis?
Yeah, that's a powerful question, but I'm going to break it down a little if you don't mind. Firstly, I'm going to begin when you talk about a leadership crisis. I'd like to begin with defining leadership. You know, there are more than 4,000 definitions of leadership. And I think the first thing, before we define a leadership crisis, what is leadership? I think, you know, for me, first of all, leadership is not a positional title. It is about action. And I think, as I shared in your previous question, we learned, and I learned as a child, that it's about taking bold action in order to analyze, energize, and galvanize a collective, diverse group to tackle tough challenges and achieve a common goal. So I think, first of all, that I would begin with my definition of leadership. I think when it comes to crisis, I think we have to put crisis into context. You know, as a top global headhunter appointing top leaders in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors during and post Mandela's presidency, when I sat down with a board to say we need a new global chairman of a multi-listed company, or we need, you know, a new C-suite executive of a company, or even a CEO for Mandela's Foundation. By the way, his board called us in to find a new turnaround CEO when his own Nelson Mandela Foundation was going through troubled times. The starting point was always the context. What are the big strategic issues and challenges? What is the priority of those? And it's always about defining a leader for a moment in time.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. There's a lag in the feed here. I don't know whose end that's on. I don't know if there's anything that you can shut on your end.
Um, when
Is it
you,
going fine on your side?
it's going fine on my end.
Okay. Well, let's so if the viewers, if you're experiencing a lag, just hang in there because then it continues. Yes, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Not at all. So I think, you know, it's about defining context, strategic priority, and what are the challenges, what is the priority, and what leader can meet this moment in time. And if I look at the world in this current context, my own, you know, we're living in a very complex world, a very complex, interconnected world with complex leadership demands. I think because of this interconnected world, we have a world on fire, we have a world at war, and we have a world in the midst of an AI revolution, with all of which pose existential threats to our human species. And so I think if we think about this context, I don't think that we as human beings have caught up with the world in which we're living. You know, I think in this global, interconnected, complex world, we're living in an age and a phase and a stage where tribal, nationalist, and populist thinking cannot survive and thrive. So I think the first crisis is that we need to develop our mental maturity. We need better and bigger thinking, to level 5 thinking. And I think we need bold moral action. So I think that's our first big challenge. I think the second big challenge is that we've misunderstood leadership. We confuse.
I'm sorry, I turned that off. I
That's
beg
okay.
your pardon. Go ahead, Anne.
Yeah. I think that the second challenge is that we have confused people in power and leadership. I think we've delegated our power, the power of the people, to the people in power. And I think we have to claim that back. We're all called to lead, and anyone, anywhere, and any time can exercise fortified moral courage and leadership excellence. So I think that's the second thing. I think we need to claim our power back and exercise leadership, as individuals and in our collective forces. I think the third thing is that we have a world that is out of economic balance. I think the Billionaires Boys Club and big business calls the shots. And I'm a committed capitalist. I'm a businesswoman, a multi-awarded businesswoman, but I'm a conscious capitalist. And I think if we have a look at some of the data on that, global justice now reveals that 157 out of 200 of the most powerful economic entities in the world, that's almost 80% of the world's most powerful economic entities, are companies, not countries. So companies like Walmart, like Amazon, like Shell have revenues that are larger than many of the world's largest economies, like the United Kingdom or India or France. So I think we need to reimagine capitalism, as one of my favorite Harvard Business School professors, Rebecca Henderson, teaches a class and wrote a book called Reimagining Capitalism. But I think we need a new brand of capitalism that shifts from serving me to serving we. And then I would say I think the next big leadership challenge and crisis is that we have a morality crisis in the world. We need a world with greater moral clarity, consciousness, and intelligence. And I'm reminded of a recent podcast I did on my own podcast, Leading Boldly into the Future, with Dr. Bernice King, the youngest child of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And, on our podcast, I had such a revelatory moment, and it was such a profound moment with Bernice. And, I asked her the question. I said, Bernice, what are the big existential threats and challenges and opportunities we have in the world that keep you up at night? And so many people talk about climate and, a world at war and AI and, all these income disparities, all of these issues. And Bernice paused and said, I think the biggest challenge we face is, who are we as a human species? What is going on with us? Because the big challenges are symptoms of a much bigger question. The bigger question is, who are we? What is going on with us? And importantly, who do we want to be? I think we're living in this gilded age where a world that is showcased with billionaires in a time where role models are kind of sending a message, that it's about fame, fortune, power, and greed. And I think in this gilded age, we've learned again from history that no good party lasts forever. If we think, let's go back to Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, married to King Louis XVI, who famously once said, let them go and eat cake, but was then at the guillotine in 1793.
Yes.
Let's fast forward to the roaring 1920s, an era of extravagant parties and also the disillusionment of the American dream. And, an elite wealthy class that was morally challenged and morally deplete. And I think it was captured in the great work by the American author, Fitzgerald, F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote that famous classic in 1925, The Great Gatsby. But let's think about how the Roaring Twenties ended. It ended on Black Tuesday in the October stock market crash and a decade of depression. So I think we are, everybody right now, we're talking about the Magnificent Seven on Wall Street that collectively own 38% of the stock market of stock market value. And, people are talking about, the pending crash. So I think our next big leadership challenge is a morality crisis. And I think that history has, I think it comes back to Bernice's question. Who are we as a human species? What is going on with us? But most importantly, who do we want to be? And I could elaborate a little more because I think Bernice's question took me into the work of Professor Yuval Harari and his work.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, you've just given us a course, like a semester-long course on what the crisis is, what leadership is, what the crisis is, many, many components of it. The ability. So from the perspective of adaptive leadership, which both of us are familiar with, leadership is not a title. It's an activity or an action, as you said, and the ability to mobilize people to take action towards a specified goal, a specified vision, which Nelson Mandela definitely had a very clear vision of what he thought the world could be, or South Africa, and the giving of equal rights to the Black people. And you've talked a lot about moral clarity. And so there is this piece about what is the inner work that's needed in order to claim one's moral clarity, in order to get clear about not being the billionaire, not being in it for self-interest, but rather for Ubuntu, for the benefit of everyone. Can you describe what you think is the inner work that leaders need to do to transform themselves?
Abby, that's a great question. And I'd like to begin with two quotes from Nelson Mandela. Two of many quotes around change. Mandela said, firstly, when I began negotiating with my foe, my opponent, my enemy, I understood that until I transformed myself, I couldn't change a nation. The second thing he said was that changing myself was much harder than changing a nation. So I think, what I would say is that, I think it begins with us and it begins within. But I think, as a kid, I used to read avidly. I came from a family that read a lot and, believed in education. But I remember reading a book by Og Mandino, who wrote a book called The Greatest Salesman in the World. And he said there are three kinds of people in the world. He said there are those that learn from their own mistakes. He said there are very few of us and we're wise. He says there are those that learn from the mistakes of others. Let me get this right. There are those that learn from the mistakes of others. There are few of us and we're wise. There are those that learn from their own mistakes. And we find greater fulfillment in that. But he said, the thing that really stuck out, he said, there are those that learn from neither, and they're most of us, and we bloody fools. And so I think that, when we think about our kind of human nature, we tend to be complacent, or what I call fat cat Garfield. And I think that, often our transformation begins with what we call in Africa VUCA. It's a wake-up moment. It's a life shock moment. It's a wake-up call. And that can be a wake-up call in a good or a not, or a tough way. It could be a phone call that says you have a cancer diagnosis. It could be the unexpected loss of a parent or a loved one. It could be what personally, and when I think about Mandela's Rivonia trial in 1964 and being given life imprisonment, I think that was a huge kind of awakening in the sense that they were expecting the death penalty. So I think on the one hand, it was a wake-up call. It was a big life shock moment, which is made up of millions of little life shocks. They're kind of triggers to our system that get us out of the state of comfort, if you like. And it was, I think, it was a moment of incredible loss. loss of time with his family, as a father, as a spouse, loss of kind of freedom in terms of his movements, his mobility, his actions. But I also think, in a way, it was, and this is just my own sense, I think it was a positive life shock moment, in a sense that it was a moment that showed Mandela and the anti-apartheid movement and the world that when you stand up and fight for what's right, you often get a different, unexpected outcome. And the unexpected outcome was the fact that they got a life sentence and not the death penalty. But I think it was the moral clarity and conviction. And as he said at his 1964 trial, he said, I'm not going to defend myself within an unjust, unequal system. It was really a statement of his vision for a new and free South Africa.
Oh, I love that. I'm not going to defend myself in a system that's unjust. Is that what you said?
Yeah, in an unjust and in an unjust system.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So I think the first thing in terms of transformation is that VUCA wake-up call. I think the second step is about noticing. It's really about self-consciousness and self-awareness and noticing what is going on. What part do I own in this mess?
Right.
Let me have a look in the mirror. For every finger we have facing forward, we have 3 facing back. And so it's so much easier for us to just keep on, deflecting, and blaming the other. But for every finger forward, there are 3 back. So what is my part of the mess? Right. And I think in our journey of transformation, I think we are really empowered when we stop blaming and naming and shaming, and we take a look in the mirror. And instead of focusing on the finger forward, we focus on the 3 facing back. We know, and let's go back to what Mandela said, that when we transform ourselves, we can then transform others and change a nation. So the transformation begins with us. And I think it's the wake-up call. I think it's the noticing. I think it's owning our part of the mess. And then I think there are various things that I've learned in my own life around reclaiming our own authority. So often we give our authority away. And I think that is one part of the leadership challenges today. We've delegated the power of the people to those in power. We need to reclaim our authority and we need to claim it back. I think there's also a process of mental flossing and obtaining mental clarity. And in obtaining that mental clarity, we can then make clear, conscious choices with mental clarity and higher levels of thinking. And I think when we don't mental floss, we end up with mental decay, in the same way that if we don't dental floss, we end up with dental decay. So that mental flossing process of dealing with mental clarity and making choices, conscious choices, in a clear mental space helps us get clarity of thinking, but also develop higher levels of thinking. I think the other thing is about, there's what I learned, it's an avowal-disavowal process, which helps us eradicate limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves. One of the beliefs that I grew up with, the limiting beliefs, was that I wasn't good enough. I grew up in a home with an incredible mother who I love and adore, and to whom I owe so much. But there were exceptional standards, and 98 for maths in grade 7 was, well, why couldn't it be 100? And I kind of learned up believing that it was never quite good enough. I'm a recovering perfectionist.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm a recovering workaholic, and to always prove that I was good enough. So there's an avowal-disavowal process where we can go through a process of, it isn't true that I'm not good enough. It is true that I am good enough.
Is what you're saying avow, A-V-O-W, avow and disavow? Is that what you're saying?
A-V-O-W-A-L.
Yeah, avowal and disavowal. Got it.
Yeah. I think another big piece about transformation, and of course we learned this from Mandela and many of my friends around the world. In fact, a very dear friend of mine who's one of the top criminal advocates, in South Africa, Lawrence Hurtis, I remember him saying one day that, one of the things about Mandela he could never quite grasp was how he came out of prison and forgave the opponents, the apartheid government,
Yes.
putting him in prison, giving him life imprisonment. He was in prison for 27 years, and forgiving his enemy, not just forgiving them to the point of letting go of ill will, which is how I define forgiveness, but also bringing them into his government of national unity and making the former president one of his deputy presidents. And, Lawrence always said to me, I don't think I could ever do that. But I think that going through a cost process and letting go of our resentments, which drives so much of our reactionary behavior. And, in my own life, Abby, I went through my own More to Life training, and I thank my More to Life community every day. And Anne McMaster, who was my first trainer, I owe so much to her, because I went on this training and I did what we call a cost process, and where we work out, the institutions, the people, and even ourselves that we hold resentments towards. What is the resentment? When did we first have it? How many years have we had this resentment? And then added up the total number of years of resentment. I had hundreds of years of resentments. I think I was the second highest in a class of a cohort of like 45. And I think for me, the big revelation, and I had done a postgraduate class in psychology to try and figure out some of my own complexities. But, when I learned that forgiveness did not condone the other person's behavior,
Yes.
when I could disentangle the fact that forgiveness does not mean condoning wrongdoing, it just means letting go of my ill will towards the other, and in some cases towards myself. And I think, what I also learned is that resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. What we don't realize at the time is that when we hold on to resentments, in 95% of the cases, often the other person or entity does not know, but mostly they don't care. So who does resentment hurt? It hurts us.
Yes.
And when we internalize resentment and act with even if it's a sophisticated mask of resentment, we're still, when we're acting out of resentment, it has physiological consequences in terms of our health. It has mental consequences, and it definitely impacts our ability to exercise leadership and meet these big challenges and moments and effect impactful, lasting change. So I think a cost process. I think the other process I learned around transformation is a mirror process. It's about letting go of the judgments we have towards ourselves. And I think when we do that, and we ground ourselves in the beauty and the gift that we have been given on this planet, I think we think, act, and lead in a very different way. I think the other thing is, as business people, we would relate to, there's a results process. And of course, having specialized in strategy in my master's and business degree, and anyone who's been a business executive understands about having a clear vision and purpose and strategy and plan. So the results process is kind of common language to many of us. I think the thing that I learned in this results process that was different from my typical business school training was that in the results process, we also get in touch with our underlying intention. So, we wanted in South Africa to build a world-class, pioneering executive search firm that pioneered the way, changed the rules of the game. It was the first woman empowered. It was the first Black empowered. It was world-class. It tied up with the 10th biggest search firm worldwide. But when the going got tough, it was our underlying intention that kept us on track. And so, we all have good days and not such good days. And it was the underlying intention, the purpose that got me out of bed every day, even when the going got tough. And our intention was to build a world-class, diverse, Black empowered business executive search firm. Why? Because I knew as a child growing up, many of our friends were friends of color. They were Black doctors, they were Indian gynecologists, they were people who were smart, who were good, and who had what Mandela called a good head and a good heart, which he called a formidable combination. And it was to show not only corporate South Africa, but show the world that, that diversity and justice is a gift for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
It builds abundance in a multiplied way.
Lovely. Well, again, there was a lot to unpack in there. The things that caught my attention, I mean, there were many things, but this idea about developing self-consciousness and noticing,
Yeah.
looking in the mirror and asking, what do I need to own? What's
Yeah.
my role in this outcome?
Yeah.
This piece of very powerful. And then this piece of recognizing our own resentments. That I think is so important. I don't know that many people talk about that, Anne, but I think that's really important because, as you said, it impacts our own physiology, our own inner self, and to let go of that. You could say I'm doing it for myself, like I should be doing it for myself, because if I hold on to it, you use the word poison, it actually poisons my insides. So the reason for letting go
Yeah.
is to free up my own energies. And then this issue of forgiveness does not equal forgetting, which I think is what South Africa taught us after the end of apartheid, because people like with the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it was about having everybody acknowledge publicly what happened. We're not closing our eyes to it, folks. This is what we all experienced.
Yeah.
Surfacing it, having us acknowledge it. And Nelson Mandela's ability to forgive, which was extraordinary and quite a moral lesson for the world, does not mean forgetting, doesn't mean you shouldn't be held accountable.
Yeah.
But in order for me to move forward, in order to transform himself, he needed to do that work in order to enable him to lead a nation.
And just to your point, Abby, his famous quote when he walked out of prison, he said, as I walked out the door towards the gate that would lead to my freedom, I
Yeah.
knew if I did not leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I would still be in prison.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
In their
Yes.
prison. He didn't say theirs, but I would still be in prison, their prison.
Yes. I remember that quote. That's such an amazing, powerful statement to make. So, Anne, I want to ask you, where and when did you learn your agency, which means your sense of yourself, your ability to make change and to have impact? Where did you learn that early on?
I think it was growing up with a very tough mum who was actually, I'm an adopted child. I think I got really lucky, Abby, and I got adopted into an amazing family. My late father, I think my parents complemented really well, and I think they gave me a sense of balance. My father didn't have a single degree, but he came to South Africa on a ship from England because he loved the African continent. He fell in love with the people, the wildlife. He had a sense of adventure. He was in tourism. And he didn't have a single degree, but I think he was one of the most intelligent people I met in terms of his common sense and common general knowledge. And, whenever I sort of had a project in school and, whether it was any country in Southern Africa, learning about their geography, their history, their political system, their culture, their people, and just their sense of it, the sense of adventure and living in the moment and the university of life. My dad taught me that. So I think that ability to be curious, to explore, and that sense of adventure and sort of traveling into the unknown. I think that gives one a sense of agency. And then I think on the other side of the coin, my mother was a strict disciplinarian, but she also was very bold, very courageous. And she stood up for principles and to a system. She played a role in helping South Africa transform the perceptions and standards of Black medical education. She taught in one of the biggest Black teaching hospitals in South Africa, King Edward VIII. And, I think growing up with that, and then she did a lot of pro bono work in rural mission hospitals in KwaZulu-Natal, the province where I grew up. And I think, seeing my mother in action, but also being exposed, Abby. And I think, the other part of transformation, which I didn't mention that I think is really important, I think I got very lucky that my mother exposed me to very different segments of the South African population that had very diverse ideologies and conflicting beliefs. She taught me to homes of poor, low-income Afrikaans people to understand their fear around,
Could you repeat the last piece about the last was about the Black Medical College, the education. Could you repeat from there?
Of course. So she taught in which was one of the largest Black teaching hospitals in South Africa, King Edward. She helped shift the standards and perceptions of Black medical education. I think another piece about transformation, if we want people to wake up, we have to take them out of their comfort zones and expose them to opposing and conflicting people, ideas, and environments. And I think as a child, I didn't realize I was going through a transformation laboratory. My mother exposed me to people who represented different segments of the South African population, opposing segments of the South African population. We went into homes of poor white Afrikaans people who felt fear about being dominated, by a majority of African Black people who lived in the country. It was fear-based, and they lived in poor homes. So I kind of learned to understand that perspective. Many of our family friends, as I said, were Black doctors or Indian gynecologists. These were very wealthy people who were very smart, but weren't allowed to be our friends because of their skin color. Right. But they were super smart. They were super kind. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so I think, I had this personal laboratory at the University of Life that taught me that when you're bold, when you stand up for values and principles about our common and shared humanity, our Ubuntu, I met people across every part of the political divide. And I realized that there was more that united us than separated us. I got to understand, even in the rural mission hospital, which was run by a British husband and wife team of medical doctors in a rural African area, that was more than a hospital. It was a community. And, so while there was violence going on in the streets of South Africa, I was living in environments with people who had different cultures, different skin colors, different religions, creeds. And these are people who created happy, successful communities. And so I lived in a community of Ubuntu. I learned that those self-created false beliefs about what divides us is a myth. Mm. And I think that being surrounded by these change makers and bold disruptors who were defying the sort of laws of what was going on in the country, in happy places and spaces, rural mission hospitals in Ngutu and King Edward Hospital and Addington, Grace Hospital, white institutions where good people were doing good things. And so I think being surrounded by change makers, having bold, adventurous parents. And, my mother was threatened by the police because she had nurses who had missed some classes, came to our home to get extra classes and missed their bus on the way home and came back to the house. My mother said, well, of course you must stay here, and they stayed overnight and the neighbors reported her to the police and, she was almost arrested. But,
Wow.
I remember sitting around the dinner table at home where my mother said, no government will tell me who I can be friends with, what I must think and believe, and let me experience for myself the goodness, smartness, and kindness of people in the world. I will choose
Yes.
that. And
So how lovely. And it would have, one wishes to talk with your mother. I don't know if she's passed by now, but to ask her where she came upon her sense of agency and her ability to summon that courage to take on a whole system. That's quite remarkable. And the fact that you grew up in this kind of this laboratory, as you said, where transformation was happening all the time. I'm quite jealous because I wish I had also grown up in that kind of laboratory. And sorry, this idea also about the ability to take on a system, which you may have already said this, but I'm just saying it in different words, which is, I think it's a key leadership trait.
yeah,
To be able to take on a system, to recognize that one is embedded in a system,
yeah,
and to take on, it's both transforming myself, but it's also thinking about what is the system that I'm working within, as you said when you talked about capitalism, and the fact that Mandela said, I'm not going to allow myself to be judged by an unjust system.
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
those multiple layers, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And just to your question about my grandmother was a pioneering force of nature.
Oh,
She
my
she
word.
was she got a postgrad degree in science. She graduated at top of her class in an era where women didn't even finish high school.
No.
And at the age of around 50, she played a major role in Johannesburg, which was the major capital city within Africa at the time. She played a major role in the city's, office. So, my grandmother was a very elegant, quiet but formidable woman. And I'll just share a brief story. One night, after she and my grandfather divorced, they divorced at the end of Second World War. Somebody had broken into her home and was standing at the end of her bed in the middle of the night. And it was just because she was driven by her values and her principles. And she was so indignant that there was a big, bold figure at the end of her bed. And she stood up and sat up in bed and said, "How dare you walk into my bedroom? Get out of here." And this fellow scuttled through the window, left in shame. And later it was found out he had killed and murdered a number of people in that area, in that neighborhood. But it was her values, her principles, and her conviction. And I think that's what my mother learned from my grandmother. And that's what I had the privilege of learning from both of them.
Wow, what a powerful story, Anne. Amazing. I think there's a perhaps hereditary piece of having courage. So you saw your grandmother and then your mother, and I think we absorb it. I think we inherit it. It's kind of like osmosis, right?
Yeah, and there's a social inheritance because I'm adopted, so I don't have that genetic hereditary strain. So I think, again, as an adopted child who also studied psychology, I've always been interested in this nature-nurture debate. So I think some of it is genetic and some of it is our social inheritance.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. Of course, I mean, we are socialized in our families. It is that
Yeah.
social piece. Yes, lovely. As we wrap up, Anne, you're working on a book. Do you want to tell the viewers about your upcoming book?
Yeah, well, I think let me put the book into context. As a young child, I used to pray for the day Mandela would be released, and I had a dream that one day I would meet him. And of course, as people know, my prayer was answered, but also my dream came true. So I met Mandela for the first time on Women's Day in South Africa. And like he always did, he would take an interest in people. And he said, "Young lady, what do you do?" And I shared with him the work we've done alongside his foundation and for leadership for the country and the continent. And he said, Leadership is a powerful leverage you can use to change the world.
Mm.
Keep up your excellent work across Africa and worldwide. And that for me, Abby, was a very personal call to action to use leadership as a lever to change the world. It led me to Harvard and beyond. And I did the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship. And as a result of that project, I co-founded a Mandela-inspired global leadership movement for change to transform our leadership crisis, to remind our generation, but significantly and importantly, to empower the next with Mandela's Leadership Blueprint, which I believe and I know is a proven way to win the good fight in the world today. So the book is called Mandela's Leadership Blueprint, a proven way to win the good fight in the world today. It's part of the movement, and the movement has a number of different elements. As you know, I host a podcast called Leading Boldly into the Future. Everybody has a Mandela moment. It's a golden thread. And that is a moment whether people have met him or watched a movie or read a book or heard his quote or read a quote on a mud hut of a rural school building, transform the way they think, act, and lead in the world today. So it's more than 100 change makers from all over the world on every continent. And the tools that we have is the podcast, the stories, the transformational stories from the book, from the podcast go into the book. It's a book, a workbook. We're doing a curriculum and master classes. And we're also getting funding. One of our co-founders is an international award-winning movie maker, Ramesh Sharma from India, who made a movie on Gandhi, Mandela, and King, amongst others. And he has already agreed to turn the book into a documentary, which we have provisionally titled From History to Hope. And we're trying to secure funding for that. And if I may share, because I think it really is as a result of this collective work, I've just had a very humbling moment to be awarded the Global Power Leader Award, which will be presented at the House of Lords in the UK Parliament this month.
Word.
And as I say, you know, it takes a village. It's not my moment alone. It's a moment for this collective movement to put together this work. And the idea, Abby, is to put this work into colleges and universities and forums, youth forums, etc., around the world, to put it online, to make it accessible, and to help the next generation to lead the Mandela way today.
Mm-hmm. Well, congratulations on your forthcoming award at the House of Lords. Very, very exciting. I think you are modeling leading the Mandela way in everything that you're doing. It's such amazing and important work that you're doing. And bravo for empowering young leaders, young emerging leaders. Such important work. And thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Abby. And my last final thought is that, you know, the children are our future. And, you know, it's the thing that Mandela missed most in prison, were the children.
Yes.
And so when we empower our children, we continue to build our legacy. But thank you so much. And thank you for the work you're doing and for having me today.
Absolutely. And thank you. And have fun in London.
I will. Thanks, Abby.